It was upon a raw November morning, with a shroud of London fog pressing close to the windows of Baker Street, that the affair which Watson would afterwards christen the Riddle of the Forgotten Omen first broke upon Holmes's tranquil routine. The coals burned low upon our hearth, and the mellow glow of the lamp made a warm island against the greyness that throbbed beyond the pane. Holmes, long and spare, sat with his knees drawn up in the bow window, a steaming cup untouched at his elbow, and the dull of his violin laid across his lap, as if he had but a moment before stilled it with a finger. Watson, whose practice allowed him a rare hour of leisure, had been glancing through the morning's Times when a small paragraph, buried on the fourth column and easily missed, gave him pause. He lowered the sheet to consider it, and his gaze, which had idly skimmed the accounts of parliamentary squabbles and a fog-induced collision upon the river, returned to the brief notice, curiously set off by the compositor's hand. Sudden death in Fleet Street. Percival Draycott, Esquire, editor of the Albion Gazette, was discovered deceased last evening in his private room at the offices of that journal. The cause is at present uncertain. The room had been secured from within. Watson would later set down that, before he could read the bland line aloud, there came the brisk and unmistakable tattoo of a man whose nerves stood on business at our door, and Mrs. Hudson, after a gasp and a little scurry of apology, ushered Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard into the room. Lestrade's thin, ferret-like face wore an expression which, if one had known the man as Holmes and Watson did, indicated not only professional anxiety, but a degree of frank bewilderment. His derby was filmed with the same wet pall that burdened the street. He removed it and stood with it in both hands like a penitent schoolboy. "Mr. Holmes," said he, "I am sorry to intrude at this hour, but we have a tidy tangle in Fleet Street. I thought it well you should hear of it before the noon editions have the town by the ears." Holmes stretched out his hand for the clipping which Watson held poised, and his grey eyes flickered once across the printed words. "So I see," he murmured. "Pray be precise, Inspector." Lestrade advanced into the circle of lamplight and spoke with the staccato of a man who has already rehearsed his tale for the magistrate. Shortly before 11 last night, Mr. Percival Draycott was discovered dead in his editorial room at the Albion Gazette. There is no mark of violence. The room was locked on the inside. There are no signs that anything was taken or disarranged. And yet, he paused, perhaps for dramatic effect, perhaps because the strangeness of it still operated upon him. There are circumstances which do not tally with a natural death. Holmes's long fingers made a little steeple beneath his chin. "Go on." "The Albion," Lestrade continued, "sits in a narrow court off Fleet Street. Draycott's private room is at the back, looking upon a light well. The door opens upon the sub-editor's room. He was last seen alive at 10:20 by his managing editor, Mr. Sidney Vale, who left him in good health and spirits, with a proof upon his desk and his pen in his hand. At 11:15, the night messenger, a boy named Will Jarvis, tried the handle to deliver a late telegram, the Paris markets as it happens, but found it secured. Mr. Vale returned with him. They knocked and called without response. The key was in the lock upon the inside. Holmes's brows rose a fraction. And the window? Latched. There is a little ventilator transom above the door, but a child would hardly squeeze through. Finding no answer, they sent for the watchman who fetched a jemmy. They forced the door, no mean task, for it is stout oak, and found Draycott slumped at his desk, his head fallen upon his left arm. "Doctor?" Holmes asked. "Summoned at once. A local man, one Saunders. Says there is no sign of violence, no froth, no stain upon the lips or tongue. He will not swear to heart failure, for Mr. Draycott was robust, but he offers it for want of anything else. He was a heavy man, 55, a regular at his club. No history of apoplexy that any of the staff can tell. There is one point, however," and here Lestrade's lip twitched, "that is curious." "Only one?" Holmes murmured. so softly that Watson alone caught the edge of amusement beneath his tone. Lestrade ignored it. There was a canary in the room, in a little brass cage that hung by the window. Dead as well. Holmes's fingers parted and then crossed again. Indeed. Please be exact, Inspector. Quite dead, Lestrade repeated. Fluffed out upon the bottom of its cage. The night editor swears the bird was singing like a piston only an hour earlier. And then there's something written upon the blotting pad. What was written? A single word. Omen, said Lestrade, and the syllables seemed to fall heavily upon the warmed air of Baker Street. Watson, keenly alert to every movement of his friend's ascetic face, noted the quick dart of Holmes's eyes to the grate, where a slow blue tongue of flame lapped at the coal and back again to Lestrade's pinched countenance. In ink, said Holmes, as one who asks if the day is fair and the rain wet. In the ordinary violet they use, yes. Big printed capitals, half off the top of the pad as if written in haste, almost straddling the edge of the paper. What is more, there is a burnt slip in the grate, a piece of the same pad tissue, we think, with the letters "Got an Omen" still legible upon it. The same hand. I could not swear it. These blotting pads are queer things for handwriting, Mr. Holmes. But there it was. Omen on the pad, and in the grate this fragment with "Got an Omen." Mr. Vale, that is Draycott's right hand, says the leader for the morning was to be entitled "The Forgotten Omen," which, if true, would account for the phrase in the fire. Ah, Holmes breathed. The leader upon what subject? Some mischief with the Society of Mediums, from what I can gather, Lestrade replied. Draycott had taken it into his head to expose certain spiritualist performances in Bloomsbury, a Madame Zuleika, an Oriental coot, if you take the handbills at face value, and a Captain Caversham, late of the army, who has been lecturing on the inner eye. There have been some threatening letters, Crank's stuff, you know the sort, and a brick through the window of the Gazette last week with "Leave the dead their peace" scrawled upon it. Mr. Vale tells me Draycott laughed them off. Holmes said nothing, but Watson saw that he had shifted slightly upon the window seat so that his long face came fully into the lamplight. To those who knew him, this small movement, the settling of a predator's muscles before it springs, spoke volumes. Tell me of the door, Inspector, Holmes continued in the same level tone. The key was within, you say? Yes. Mr. Vale swears to it. The locksmith we called, a fellow named Briggs, says there is no trick to that lock other than a good key and a strong hand. No mark upon the wood or the plate save where our own men forced it. The windows were latched upon the inside. The chimney is narrow and flued into the same light well. It is an ugly little place altogether, anything else disarranged. A paper missing? A drawer forced? Nothing. The proof upon the desk was uncorrected. 2 coffee cups, one with a lip mark, one without, stood upon the tray. The clock upon the mantel gave 20 minutes to 11 and was still going. There is a splash of the violet ink upon Mr. Draycott's right cuff and a spot upon his left thumb. The pen lay across the pad. The room was close, but not enough to set a man choking. That is Dr. Saunders' account. For myself, I smelled nothing save the usual half-and-half reek of gas and printer's ink that clings to those places. Holmes tapped a long finger against his lower lip. And what says Mr. Sidney Vale? There is often more in the first exclamations of a man than in his sworn deposition. Mr. Vale is... Well, sir, he is shaken, Lestrade admitted. He is a dry sort of stick, but he had been with Draycott these 15 years and thinks of the Albion as men think of their regiments. He will not hear of foul play. He says so, and then contradicts himself within half a minute with a dozen suspicious particulars. He thinks, too, that we should be cautious, for the Gazette sits on some very delicate matter just now. Holmes's eyes half closed. Delicate? A sealed packet from the Home Office, something to do with prison, Reforms Mr. Vale is cagey. He says the packet is in their safe and remains there, sealed and signed for. He made a point of showing it to me. It is untouched. There's nothing missing that any of them can notice. And yet, he spread his thin hands. And yet he is as nervous as a cat on hot bricks. There was a small pause in which the fog nudged again at the glass, and the crack of a whip somewhere in the street below came muffled as if heard from the bottom of a well. Holmes put aside the violin with which his fingers had idly been playing, and rose from the window seat with that quick, noiseless decision which always set Watson's heart to beating a fraction faster. "You astonish me, Lestrade," he said lightly. "You have brought me a problem which is, by your account, self-evident in every particular." Lestrade looked injured. "Self-evident? Self-evident in that it cannot possibly be what it seems," Holmes returned, the ghost of a smile at one corner of his mouth. "A man in good health sits down to write an article entitled The Forgotten Omen. He is found dead within the hour, the door secured, the windows latched. The canary, whose lungs are perhaps more delicate than our own, expired in its cage, and a theatrical word written upon the blotting pad. You say there is no disturbance, nothing missing, no assailant conceivable, and yet everything is awry. It would be an affront to reason to call it natural, and an affront to logic to call it simple." Watson could not forbear a glance of admiration, which Holmes, with a courtesy that never deserted him, chose to ignore. Lestrade bristled a little, but there was relief beneath it. "Then you will come?" Holmes crossed to the mantel, took up his clay from the row of pipes, and laid it down again. "Watson," said he, "your boots and your thickest scarf. There is no crueler companion than a London fog when it takes one at the throat. Inspector, give us 5 minutes and a cab. If Mr. Vale is as cautious as you describe, he will keep his composure as well as his sealed packets until we arrive." Lestrade permitted himself the smallest of smiles and turned upon his heel. "I will have a hansom at the door in 2 minutes, Mr. Holmes." When the inspector had gone, Holmes stood a moment, the lamplight making a pale oval of his face, and glanced once more at the clipped paragraph that Watson still held. "The Forgotten Omen," he repeated softly. "One wonders, Watson, which omen, Mr. Draycott fancied the public had forgotten. It is the habit of our species to neglect the small, persistent warnings in favor of a single, flashing portent. We shall see at Fleet Street whether the dead man remembered his own title to the end, or whether another hand supplied it." With that, he reached for his coat. The bell of St. Mary Lestrade tolled the half-hour as we descended the stairs, and the fog swept in when Mrs. Hudson opened the door to the street, curling round us as if curious too. Holmes sprang lightly into the waiting hansom, Watson after him, and the horse set off at a trot that sent the wet glow of gas lamps wheeling past and swallowed us into the smoky arteries of the city where, more often than not, the curious and the terrible walk hand in hand. The hansom plunged us into a narrow court off Fleet Street, where the lamps drooped like wet tulips and the churning presses below stairs kept up a ceaseless undertone as of a great beast breathing. Lestrade led the way with the briskness of a man anxious to be done with corridors. A watchman with an old soldier's stoop saluted him. A pale youth in his shirt-sleeves, afterwards identified as Will Jarvis, hovered with the anxious curiosity proper to his years, and a gentleman of spare habit and parchment cheeks stepped forward, removing his spectacles with a hand that trembled perceptibly. This was Mr. Sidney Vale. His dry, precise features suggested a schoolmaster who had lost patience with the alphabet. "You will forgive the disorder, Mr. Holmes," said he, in a voice that clipped each word to the bone. "We have kept the room as it was." Holmes's glance ran over him as one might skim a leader to seize the gist. "You have not been home," he observed, taking the man's long fingers for the briefest instant. "Your collar is starched for the day, but your cuffs are yesterday's. The line of ink across your right thumb is old enough to have been washed once and returned. And the watch chain you wear is reversed in the waistcoat hole, which happens when a man sleeps in a chair and wakes to put it back without a mirror. Your solicitude does you credit." Vale blushed to the roots of his iron-grey hair. "I confess I have not left the premises, Mr. Holmes." "Come then," said Holmes, and his tone became all business. "Inspector, the door as it was, if you please." The corridor outside Draycott's private room was narrow and ill-lit. The ventilated transom above the door made a square of black in the upper air. Holmes did not at once enter. He slipped his magnifying lens into his eye, examined the escutcheon and the lock plate, and then, standing upon a chair fetched by the watchman, passed a long, thin finger over the hinge of the ventilator. He brought it down smeared with grime and held it near the lamp of a constable's bull's eye. "Dust which lies undisturbed upon a hinge," he remarked, more to himself than to us, "does not knit itself into ridges upon the edge." "This has been opened within the day." Lestrade peered upward. "You think?" "I think we shall earn our supper by observing, and our sleep by not concluding too hastily," returned Holmes. "Let us go in." The air within the editorial sanctum was close with print and lamp smoke, and there was that faint, sick-room sweetness which one notices in chambers where a fire has been poor and a window. Shut the body of Percival Draycott, heavy and square, sat yet in his armchair at the desk, his head declined upon his left sleeve, the pen fallen athwart the blotting pad where the big capitals of the word O-M-E-N glared up like a challenge. Beyond him, the brass cage of a canary dangled by the cut window, the little corpse fluffed upon the sand at the bottom like a discarded glove. The mantel clock ticked with sedulous regularity and pointed to 20 minutes to the hour at which we stood. Holmes went first to the bird. He lifted the cage gently, held it so that the lamp shone upon the tiny breast, and observed the eye and beak with a scrupulous attention that might have seemed ridiculous did one not know the man. "No stain," he murmured. "No convulsion to mark the last perch. The sand is not torn as it would be if there had been a struggle. The water is clear. The seed is ordinary millet. Our little sentinel of the mines has done his duty and fallen at his post." He replaced the cage with a care that was almost tender and moved on without explanation. He next examined the door from the inner side, the key which still stood in the ward, and the jamb where the police had forced the panel. He returned to the chair, stood upon it once more beneath the transom, and this time took from his pocket a bit of thin card with a smear of something dark upon one edge. He touched the hinge, the frame, and the lip of the opening with the card, sniffed it as one might sniff a wine, and, without comment, slipped the scrap into his case. I confess I was at a loss to know what inference such a trifle could bear. At the desk his proceedings were more explicit. He held the blotting pad at an angle, studying the grain where the big capitals had impressed themselves, and then, with a soft breath to raise the nap, he bent closer still. "Mr. Vale," said he without looking up, "pray, is it Mr. Draycott's habit to print in capitals when he writes for the press?" "Never," Vale replied, and emotion shook the dryness from his voice. "He writes a firm, copperplate hand." "Those letters are not his." Holmes nodded as if a point in Euclid had been conceded. He lifted the pen, scraped the nib upon his nail, and pointed with it to the violet splash upon the dead man's right cuff and the tiny dot upon the left thumb. He wrote, and at speed, before, whatever befell him, could remove him from his chair. "2 cups, Inspector," he indicated the tray. "1 is used and bears the merest shadow of a lip. 1 stands as poured. No sugar has been taken. See the unbroken film along the rim." He weighed the spoon, glanced into the sugar bowl, and then laid all down again with the air of a man who pins a paper to a board and leaves it to wait its turn. "Here is the fragment in the grate," Lestrade offered, with the relish of a man who believes he assists. "You can read the gotten omen." Holmes took the charred slip delicately, studied the torn edge, and fished with the tip of his knife among the cinders for a moment. bringing up nothing more than a heel of burnt tobacco and a grey fluff that clung to his blade. This too disappeared into his pocketbook. "The Paris Market's telegram?" he asked suddenly. Vale indicated the boy in the doorway. "Jarvis brought it at 1:15. He will tell you." The lad twisted his cap. "Beg pardon, sir." I tapped, and 'twas locked. I banged and called, and no answer. Mr. Vale came, and we knocked together. 'Twas quiet, save the clock. I thought I heard the canary once, a sort of cheep, but it might have been my fancy. Holmes had by this time gone to the gas bracket upon the wall. He turned the cock, sniffed, and turned it back until the blue tongue of flame resumed its whisper. His nostrils dilated, and he moved once more to the transom, holding a vesta at the opening. The tiny flame fluttered as if in a draught that ran from corridor to room. "There is a current where there should be none," he said at last, and the look in his eye, which I had learned to fear and value in equal measure, came and went like light across water. "Inspector, have the general supply turned off below while we remain. Mr. Vale, you will have your messenger boy ready for me in 5 minutes. I think his ears may have served him better than any of us suppose." The hansom plunged us into a narrow court off Fleet Street, where the lamps drooped like wet tulips and the churning presses below stairs kept up a ceaseless undertone as of a great beast breathing. Lestrade led the way with the briskness of a man anxious to be done with corridors. A watchman with an old soldier's stoop saluted him. A pale youth in his shirt sleeves, afterwards identified as Will Jarvis, hovered with the anxious curiosity proper to his years, and a gentleman of spare habit and parchment cheeks stepped forward, removing his spectacles with a hand that trembled perceptibly. This was Mr. Sidney Vale. His dry, precise features suggested a schoolmaster who had lost patience with the alphabet. "You will forgive the disorder, Mr. Holmes," said he, in a voice that clipped each word to the bone. "We have kept the room as it was." Holmes's glance ran over him as one might skim a leader to seize the gist. "You have not been home," he observed, taking the man's long fingers for the briefest instant. "Your collar is starched for the day, but your cuffs are yesterday's. The line of ink across your right thumb is old enough to have been washed once and returned. And the watch chain you wear is reversed in the waistcoat hole, which happens when a man sleeps in a chair and wakes to put it back without a mirror. Your solicitude does you credit." Vale blushed to the roots of his iron-grey hair. "I confess I have not left the premises, Mr. Holmes." "Come, then," said Holmes, and his tone became all business. "Inspector, the door, as it was, if you please." The corridor outside Draycott's private room was narrow and ill-lit. The ventilated transom above the door made a square of black in the upper air. Holmes did not at once enter. He slipped his magnifying lens into his eye, examined the escutcheon and the lock plate, and then, standing upon a chair fetched by the watchman, passed a long, thin finger over the hinge of the ventilator. He brought it down, smeared with grime, and held it near the lamp of a constable's bull's-eye. "Dust which lies undisturbed upon a hinge," he remarked, more to himself than to us, "does not knit itself into ridges upon the edge. This has been opened within the day." Lestrade peered upward. "You think—" "I think we shall earn our supper by observing, and our sleep by not concluding too hastily," returned Holmes. "Let us go in." The air within the editorial sanctum was close with print and lamp smoke, and there was that faint, sick-room sweetness which one notices in chambers where a fire has been poor and a window shut. The body of Percival Draycott, heavy and square, sat yet in his armchair at the desk, his head declined upon his left sleeve, the pen fallen athwart the blotting pad where the big capitals of the word OMEN glared up like a challenge. Beyond him, the brass cage of a canary dangled by the cut window, the little corpse fluffed upon the sand at the bottom like a discarded glove. The mantel clock ticked with sedulous regularity and pointed to 20 minutes to the hour at which we stood. Holmes went first to the bird. He lifted the cage gently, held it so that the lamp shone upon the tiny breast, and observed the eye and beak with a scrupulous attention that might have seemed ridiculous did one not know the man. "No stain," he murmured. "No convulsion to mark the last perch. The sand is not torn as it would be if there had been a struggle. The water is clear. The seed is ordinary millet. Our little sentinel of the mines has done his duty and fallen at his post." He replaced the cage with a care that was almost tender and moved on without explanation. He next examined the door from the inner side, the key which still stood in the ward, and the jamb where the police had forced the panel. He returned to the chair, stood upon it once more beneath the transom, and this time took from his pocket a bit of thin card with a smear of something dark upon one edge. He touched the hinge, the frame, and the lip of the opening with the card, sniffed it as one might sniff a wine, and, without comment, slipped the scrap into his case. I confess I was at a loss to know what inference such a trifle could bear. At the desk his proceedings were more explicit. He held the blotting pad at an angle, studying the grain where the big capitals had impressed themselves, and then, with a soft breath to raise the nap, he bent closer still. "Mr. Vale," said he without looking up. "Pray, is it Mr. Draycott's habit to print in capitals when he writes for the press?" "Never," Vale replied, and emotion shook the dryness from his voice. "He writes a firm, copperplate hand." "Those letters are not his," Holmes nodded as if a point in Euclid had been conceded. He lifted the pen, scraped the nib upon his nail, and pointed with it to the violet splash upon the dead man's right cuff and the tiny dot upon the left thumb. He wrote, and at speed, before, whatever befell him, could remove him from his chair. "2 cups, Inspector." He indicated the tray. "One is used and bears the merest shadow of a lip. One stands as poured. No sugar has been taken. See the unbroken film along the rim." He weighed the spoon, glanced into the sugar bowl, and then laid all down again with the air of a man who pins a paper to a board and leaves it to wait its turn. "Here is the fragment in the grate," Lestrade offered, with the relish of a man who believes he assists. "You can read the got an omen." Holmes took the charred slip delicately, studied the torn edge, and fished with the tip of his knife among the cinders for a moment, bringing up nothing more than a heel of burnt tobacco and a grey fluff that clung to his blade. This too disappeared into his pocketbook. "The Paris market's telegram?" he asked suddenly. Vale indicated the boy in the doorway. "Jarvis brought it at 1:15. He will tell you," the lad twisted his cap. "Beg pardon, sir." I tapped, and 'twas locked. I banged and called, and no answer. Mr. Vale came, and we knocked together. 'Twas quiet, save the clock. I thought I heard the canary once. Sorta cheap, but it might have been my fancy. Holmes had by this time gone to the gas bracket upon the wall. He turned the cock, sniffed, and turned it back until the blue tongue of flame resumed its whisper. His nostrils dilated, and he moved once more to the transom, holding a vesta at the opening. The tiny flame fluttered as if in a draught that ran from corridor to room. "There is a current where there should be none," he said at last, and the look in his eye, which I had learned to fear and value in equal measure, came and went like light across water. "Inspector, have the general supply turned off below while we remain. Mr. Vale, you will have your messenger boy ready for me in 5 minutes. I think his ears may have served him better than any of us suppose." We found a cab quickly in Fleet Street, and in 10 minutes had swung north into the broader airs of Bloomsbury. The fog here was thinner, a pale skim that lay along the railings and turned the squares to ghosts. Holmes, wrapped to the chin and sunk in his own calculations, scarcely spoke until we drew up opposite a respectable house in Keppel Street whose brass plate, bold as an epigraph, announced Madame Zuleika. Scientific demonstrations. Private circles by appointment. Holmes's knuckles had not done more than whisper upon the door when it opened a wary inch upon a chain, and a neat parlour-maid eyed us doubtfully. At Holmes's card and name, the chain fell, and we were admitted to a drawing room whose sober furniture had begun to wear a curious theatrical air. A black cabinet stood in one corner, a narrow little mahogany press with curtains, while upon a side table were disposed a speaking trumpet of polished ebony, a tambourine, a slate with a stump of chalk, and a glass decanter with 2 small goblets. The gaslight was shaded and burned with a steady, oily glow. Madame Zuleika entered with a rustle of silk and a faint odor of violets. She was no Oriental, but a handsome English woman of 35, with a creamy pallor and eyes that had learned the trick of dwelling thoughtfully upon nothing. Her hair, glossy and abundant, was dressed with a little jeweled fillet that might have been Egyptian in a dim light and Yorkshire in a bright one. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," she said, with a slight foreigning of her vowels which did not deceive me. "This is an honor. Captain Caversham has spoke of you. He says you have the skeptical mind." Her smile showed an even rank of teeth and did not touch her eyes. "If you come to mock, sir, I tell you frankly I am too tired to be amused." "We come to do justice," Holmes returned mildly. "And we are always fatigued by injustice. You know, of course, that Mr. Percival Draycott of the Albion Gazette was found dead this morning." A quick spasm passed across her face. It was gone in an instant, but I had seen it. Dead? Mon Dieu. He meant to be very hard with me. He came to a sitting last week and he was, unkind. But death, no, I am very sorry. You had warning of the tone of his article. "I have friends," she said with a delicate lift of the shoulders. "People warn me when there is danger, Mr. Holmes." "And they fling bricks through windows?" Holmes asked, so gently that one might have supposed him to inquire after her health. She met his gaze without flinching. "I do not throw bricks. I am a lady and the captain," Holmes continued. "He is, I think, late of a regiment in India. He is the soul of honor," she said quickly, "and hot in defense of a friend. If he wrote the Gazette a letter of challenge, is that a crime?" "Hardly," Holmes returned, "unless the challenge is accepted and the pistol discharged at the wrong end." He moved as if idly about the room, but there was nothing idle in the way his eyes missed no corner. He lifted the tambourine, sniffed it, and laid it down. He pressed his finger upon the hinge of the black cabinet's door and brought it away, faintly greasy. "You oil your hinges," he observed. "The spirits dislike creaking," she replied quite gravely, "as do burglars. Pray forgive me. My comparisons are mechanical. You gave a sitting last night. 2. A circle at 9 here in my rooms. At 10:30 I was engaged at the captain's lecture rooms in Woburn Place to demonstrate the slate writing and the independent voice. There were 30 persons present, ladies and gentlemen of good position. Which concluded at what hour? Near to 11. You came home at once? By cab, with Mrs. Enderby, who will swear to it. Holmes nodded as if satisfied that the world's clockwork still ran to time. His hand had drifted to the side table. He took up the ebony trumpet, peered down its throat, and then with the tip of his forefinger drew from its lip a speck which he held to the light. It looked to me like a black powder. He touched it to his tongue, a practice which never ceased to alarm me, and made no wry face. "India rubber bloom," he murmured. "You keep your apparatus neat. The tubing is new. They perish," she said simply. "I change them when they crack." "Quite. And your gas fitter obliges you promptly?" "My gas fitter." Holmes's eyes rested for an instant upon a small card pinned to the inside of a cupboard door opposite the hearth. Madame Zuleika had turned to the maid to ask for tea. In that moment, Holmes's long arm had opened the door as if to admire a shelf of china. On the card, in a neat clerk's hand, I saw Pike and Ward, Gas Fitters and Smiths, 17 Little Russell Street. Account rendered beneath the card, coiled upon the shelf in a brown paper wrapping, lay a length of narrow rubber tubing, and next to it a shallow tin of some fat substance which, when Holmes's nail just touched its edge, glimmered with the peculiar dullness of tallow. Madame Zuleika turned back, and her gaze followed ours. She did not, to her credit, blench. "I do not conceal my tradesmen," she said. "The captain will not have flames that sputter. I do what is necessary." Holmes inclined his head. "You are sensible." He replaced the cupboard door with his habitual nicety. "One more question, if you will indulge me. Mr. Draycott, did he ever seek a private interview?" She hesitated. "He came once. Last Tuesday. He wished to see the cabinet. He was very clever. He knew where to look. I told him my secrets were harmless. He laughed and said that some harms are not made by knives. And then? He said his article would not be kind, but that it might be fair. Oh, Mr. Holmes, I did not wish him harm. I do not do harm. I astonish. I comfort. I earn my bread." Holmes's face softened a hair's breadth. "And your captain? He is proud. He thinks men like Mr. Draycott sneer at belief. He says they will ruin good works to make a laugh." Holmes took up his hat. "You have been frank, madame. If the police should trouble you, remember that frankness is the best ally of innocence. One may keep one's marvels without keeping one's mouth shut." In the cab again, Holmes was silent until we crossed the square by the museum. Then he remarked, more to the window than to me, "It is a little too convenient, Watson, that a woman who makes voices from tubes should be suspected of using a tube to make a man silent forever." "You think her innocent?" "I think her alibi credible and her equipment commonplace. India rubber and tallow are as common in London as fog. But I do not love coincidences. Pike and Ward of Little Russell Street. Shall we say, after luncheon?" "I'm with you." "And so, if my arithmetic is still serviceable, we visit the man who keeps Madame Zuleika's trumpets babbling. He may have been as obliging to Fleet Street as to Keppel Street, and men who oil hinges for a living sometimes know when a door has been opened." Pike and Ward proved to be a narrow-fronted place with a deep, oily den behind it, where lengths of iron pipes stood like muskets in a rack, and coils of black rubber hung in festoons from pegs along the wall. The air had the thick animal smell of tallow and machine grease, with a keen underscent of metal filings. A wire-screened stove glowed in the corner, and a hammer rang now and again from some inner shed like the measured pulse of the place. A spare man in spectacles, whom we afterwards learned was Mr. Ward came forward, wiping his hands upon a rag which left them blacker than before. Holmes showed his card. It was diverting to observe how the name melted reluctance as a flame melts frost. "You sell rubber tubing," Holmes began pleasantly, "to many of our more ingenious fellow citizens." "We do so, sir," said Ward, on his guard despite himself. "For pumps, physic bottles, laboratories, and cabinets that speak without speakers," Holmes put in. "I do not ask you to betray your patrons. I ask you for facts. Did you, last evening between 8 and 9, sell a length of quarter-inch tubing, say 4 to 6 yards, together with a little cotton waste and a dollop of tallow?" Ward's eyes flickered. His hand strayed, with a movement more nervous than guilty, to the counter where a dog-eared ledger lay. "We sold many such in the course of a week," he fenced. Holmes nodded amiably. "Let us try it this way. At what hour do you close?" 9:30, sir." "And last night? Trade was brisk?" "Moderate," Ward allowed. His fingers, as if against orders from his brain, opened the ledger at the day's page. Holmes did not look at it. He turned away to examine with great interest a rack of gooseneck fittings, curved, hinged nozzles with a little collar that could be tightened upon a jet. "A pretty device," he observed. "It saves a man standing upon a chair to fit his tube." "It does, sir," Ward returned, and there was a rueful respect in his voice now. "Stage men like 'em, and lecturers." "And editors?" Holmes asked, as if idly. Ward's guard dropped the inch. "That is the difference between refusal and admission. A gentleman last night, about 9:15, took 6 yards of 1/4 inch, 2 ounces of cotton waste, a small tin of tallow, and one of those goosenecks, as you say, paid cash and would not leave a name. But he had, if I may say, the printer's smell on him, the ink, you know, and his cuffs was fair peppered with violet stains. I thought him a Gazette man, Mr. Holmes, and so would you. Holmes turned, and his smile was very slight and very courteous. You have an exact sense of odors, Mr. Ward. I commend it. What was his appearance? A gentleman, sir. 30 to 40, clean-shaven, save for a small mustache. He'd the calm way one used to being obeyed by subordinates and contradicted by no one. Square shoulders and a slight crimp in the hair above his right ear, where a hat presses if 'tis worn late. Holmes's gaze rested for a breath upon me and flicked away. And he wrote nothing? No address? No memorandum? Ward hesitated. We make out a little counter-slip, sir, just to tally our stock at the week's end. I wrote it myself. 6 coeur, tube, and so on. He took it. There's the carbon beneath, he added, and he turned the leaf. Holmes's hand moved with a lazy indifference that deceived no one who knew him. He drew the book near, studied it as if admiring Ward's neat numerals, and then, with a sort of absent-minded gratitude, asked leave to sharpen the sharp pencil. He mended it delicately with his knife, laid a square of thin paper, taken, as I noted with amazement, from his own pocket-book, over the indented page, and commenced to shade it lightly from edge to edge. At first it seemed childish, then, very softly, the ghosts of letters began to come up beneath the rub of the graphite, reversed and imperfect, capital strokes, a figure, a fragment of a word. Holmes glanced once, closed the ledger with a gentle hand, and slid the shaded scrap into his case. You have been of real service, Mr. Ward, said he. You supply Madame Zuleika, I think. We do, sir. Small orders, and Captain Caversham for his rooms in Woburn Place. Good customers, both. When did the captain last require a gooseneck? Ward considered. A month gone, sir. We fitted his bracket afresh. He pays his bill like a man, and the Gazette? They've had us in for a leak or two. 3 days since, we sent Hobbs, our journeyman, to reset a joint in their sub-editor's room, not Mr. Draycott's mind. The back office? Of course, said Holmes, as if that point had been his own. You're Hobbs, an honest man. As honest as you get in a shop, Ward grinned. He drinks when paid and works when hungry. We took our leave, and Holmes, once in the street, lengthened his stride. I knew that gait. It was as if his brain had slipped a cog into a quicker wheel. For a dozen paces I held my questions. Then I could not forbear. You saw something in the indentations. I saw something, he answered, and there was that glow about him which comes when the pattern he seeks begins to crystallize. But, my dear fellow, if I told you each stroke of the pencil, you would have no appetite left for the drawing. You think, then, that the Gazette supplied its own murder? I think, said he, that men who handle violet ink are not confined to Fleet Street, and that gentlemen who buy goosenecks do not necessarily fit them to their own walls. Let us step to Woburn Place. It is well to see how the captain turns a tap. The lecture rooms in Woburn Place were a pair of decent upper chambers above a bookseller's. We found them deserted, save for a caretaker who was sweeping sawdust from the floor. The apparatus, a little platform, a black cabinet twin to Madame Zuleika's, and 4 gas jets upon jointed arms, stood as from the night before. Holmes went to the nearest bracket, loosened the collar with his fingers, and examined the metal with a quick, bird-like peck of eye and lip. New threads, he remarked. Rennett's pattern. See how the pitch differs from Farquhar's? Our man at the Gazette would have found his gooseneck but ill-suited to this, Watson, had he wished to make a short-cut. He took a half-inch of rubber from his pocket, fitted it, and then withdrew it, sniffing the end. They burn a richer gas here. One could sing to it. The caretaker, a slow countryman, volunteered that the captain had been there until near 11, locking up after the ladies were gone. A decent gentleman, he added, but he has a temper with boys who laugh. Holmes thanked him and looked once more along the line of jets, his eye lingering an instant upon a smutch of tallow no bigger than a pin's head upon the hinge of the inner door. He said nothing, but when we were again in the street he drew a long breath that steamed in the thin air. "Lestrade," he observed, "will be charmed with the captain and the madame. They fit so well, they fit too well. Come, Watson, there is one more errand before dusk, and then I shall be content to let the inspector be happy for a few hours." Holmes's one more errand took us first, to my surprise, not to Fleet Street, but to a small bird fancier's shop off Clare Market, where he purchased, with the gravity of a curate choosing his texts, a lively yellow canary and a little wicker travel cage. He added to his parcels a toy whistle from a tray by the till and a packet of waxed cord. When I raised an eyebrow, he only observed, "A barometer that sings, Watson. One cannot be too literal when dealing with gas." We were back in the Albion's court before the lamps needed trimming. Lestrade had returned from some profitable bustle. His expression bore that mingled cheerfulness and zeal which in him presaged an arrest. "We have our birds caged too, Mr. Holmes," he announced with relish. "Captain Caversham and the lady are under notice. I've had a sniff around their rooms and found tubes enough to furnish a chemist and grease on every hinge. Their alibis will give way under warmth. Warmth applied to the wrong spot softens nothing," Holmes returned dryly. "You shall have your demonstration and then your warmth. Vale." "In his room," said Lestrade. "He has given me a list of persons warned by their friends to look out for Draycott's leader, 2 mediums besides the madame, 3 platformers, and a publisher who prints their pamphlets. Also, 1 Mr. Abel Pierce, their solicitor. Keep Mr. Vale handy," said Holmes. "And the watchman." He turned to me with a little nod. "Come, Watson." In Draycott's room the air had cleared. The gas below stairs had been restored to the rest of the building, but remained off at our bracket. Holmes placed the wicker cage where the brass one had hung and set the toy whistle upon the desk beside the blotting pad, as if arranging the properties for a children's play. He then drew from his pocket a fresh length of 1/4-inch rubber and a small cork neatly bored through the center. At the bracket, he loosened the collar, seated the cork so that the tube could be fixed airtight, and then, with an almost ceremonial neatness, he ran the free end up to the ventilator and left it coiled upon the inner sill like a sleeping snake. "Lestrade," he called, "stand in the passage with the boy Jarvis as you did last night. When I rap once, have the lad put his ear close to the ventilator." "What am I to listen for?" the youth asked, wide-eyed. "For what you heard yesterday and were ashamed to report," Holmes replied. "Now, Watson, observe." He closed the door and moved to the desk. Taking up the pen that had lain across the pad, he wrote in a quick, legible hand the word OMEN in capitals, then turned the pad so that the light fell across the fibers and held it beside the earlier word. "A respectable imitation," he remarked, "but even so, see the pressure." Draycott's pen sat as easy in his fingers as his cigar. A copyist's hand grips harder. More, the nib. Notice the bright, fresh split in my stroke and the thick, feathered edge in the other. That stroke was made by a tired nib. Mr. Vale assures me Draycott mended his every night. Someone yesterday used a pen that was not Draycott's. Witness the angle of the splash upon the right cuff, thrown off as the hand snatched. I incline to think the capitals upon the pad were written in mockery or haste, while Draycott's attention was elsewhere. "You mean Vale wrote it?" I ventured. "I mean," said Holmes evenly, "that whoever wrote it printed. Printing is a habit more with sub-editors than with editors. But do not be too greedy, my dear fellow. The dish is not served." He rapped once upon the panel, mounted the chair, and, with a deftness that always filled me with something like awe, fed the free end of the rubber through the ventilator so that it drooped in the passage above the gas jet. Then he turned the cock in the room a bare hair's breadth. There was no flame, of course. The jet was stopped, but a whisper was born in the tube such as one hears at a seashell's mouth. Holmes put the toy whistle to the end in the room and blew very softly. Jarvis gave a shout outside. "That, sir!" That's the hiss I heard. Holmes's eyes smiled without his mouth following suit. He drew the tube back, restored the cock to shut, and descended. A voice can travel so, a gas can travel so. Both can leave but the faintest of traces. The boy's ear is honest. Keep it so, Lestrade. He dismissed the lad and sent for the watchman, the old soldier with the stupor. "Last night at 11:15, did any man pass you in the back passage?" The fellow shifted his weight and rubbed his knuckles with a slow embarrassment. "Begging your pardon, sir, it might be nothing. There was a gent as went along quiet, soft boots, and I thought him one of the reporters taking a short cut to the back stair. Small mustache, carrying a little leather bag such as tradesman has. He'd a look as if he didn't want bothering, if you take me. I'd just stepped in at the pump to draw a drop from my throat, sir, and when I came out, Mr. Vale was calling and the boy a-knocking." "Did he come from this end?" Holmes asked, "or go to it?" "From it, sir." "From Mr. Draycott's door. Did you challenge him?" "No, sir. I knew near all our gentlemen by sight, and he was like any of 'em in his coat. Besides, I'd only the one lamp, and the fog was in." Holmes nodded as if this were exactly the answer he had anticipated. He turned to Lestrade. "There is your man to please the newspapers, Inspector. Small mustache, soft boots, a tradesman's bag, and violet ink on his cuffs. You may arrest him in half a dozen rooms within a quarter mile and be wrong in 5. "You know his name?" Lestrade demanded, scenting triumph. "I know," said Holmes, "that he bought a gooseneck fitted to the Gazette's pattern at 8:45 and that he writes in capitals when he chooses. I do not think Madame Zuleika troubles herself with fittings, nor that the captain's mustache is small. If you clap irons on either tonight, you will be removing my screen before I have arranged my scene." Lestrade made a face, but, to do him justice, swallowed his impatience. "And your scene?" "After the second edition is put to bed," Holmes answered. "Keep the corridor clear. Hold Mr. Vale, Mr. Pierce, your sub-editors, and 1 or 2 of the printers from the Stone. I shall trouble you for an empty bag from Pike and Ward. Mr. Ward will oblige, and the boy Jarvis. Watson," he added, taking up the wicker cage with a care that sat, oddly, upon his angular frame, "our chorister shall not sing to death for us. I want only ears to prick and feathers to stir. There is a little matter in the leader which may prick a man more sharply than gas, and we shall see, when the light is lowered and the corridor is quiet, who cannot bear the sound of his own contrivance." The presses were thundering their last before midnight when Holmes had us marshalled in the narrow passage. The watchman kept the stair. Lestrade, with 2 constables, stood where he could see faces without being seen. Mr. Vale, pale and rigid, had brought with him 2 of his staff. The night editor, Mr. Hind, a portly man with a habit of snuffing as if the air offended him, and a younger sub-editor, Mr. Arthur Crispin, whose neat, clipped mustache and well-brushed hair gave him an almost military air. Mr. Abel Pierce, the solicitor to certain spiritualist associations, had arrived, protesting his client's innocence and his own fatigue, and remained to protest further if need be. The corridor gas was lowered till it showed more wick than flame. The door to Draycott's room stood ajar. Within, the canary in its wicker prison made a small living point against the gloom. Holmes had run his tubing once more, the inner end seated with a cork upon the bracket. The outer drooped, unseen from below, just within the ventilator above our heads. He had placed upon the desk, where the blotting pad lay like a dare, the toy whistle he had bought that afternoon. He now drew from his pocket the proof of Mr. Draycott's unfinished leader, and, handing it to me, said very quietly, "Read, Watson, the paragraph beginning. It is a simple matter. Slowly, if you please." I cleared my throat and obeyed. The sentences were those of a practiced hand, cool and sardonic. It is a simple matter, if one is willing to put aside scruple with sense, to give a voice to a room. A little tallow upon a hinge, a strip of India rubber not wider than a bootlace, a ventilator handily placed, and the credulous will swear that a dead aunt has whispered in their ear. We have seen the trick with our own eyes. We have smelt the stale breath of it. We will tell our readers, next week, how the thing is done, and how those who profit by ignorance should be made to profit by justice." At that word, Holmes inclined his head to Jarvis. The lad put his mouth close to the ventilator and made the soft, insinuating hiss with the whistle that we had heard before. In the dim light, the sound seemed to take shape in the air, to creep along the wood and under the lintel. The canary stirred, lifted its head sharply, and gave one bright, questioning chirp. I was watching Mr. Crispin. The hiss had scarcely begun before his head came up with a jerk as if a wire had twitched it. His right hand went, by an involuntary habit, to his inner breast, and then, checked by the consciousness that he was observed, dropped stiffly to his side. I heard the faint grind of a tooth upon tooth. Mr. Hind only sniffed, fretful and ostentatiously incurious. Mr. Vale, to his credit, never shifted his gaze from the open door, where his chief's dead bulk made a shadow upon the room. Abel Pierce made a little dismissive movement with his smooth hand and said too loudly, "Childish." Holmes let the silence fall back like a curtain. He moved the tube with his forefinger so that it made the merest brush against the inner wood, and the whisper altered by a shade. Crispin's hand moved again, this time in a small automatic fumble toward the ventilator, as if to pluck something away that was not there. His lips thinned. He forced a smile and swallowed. "You do not like the music, Mr. Crispin?" Holmes inquired, without a particle of emphasis. "It is nothing," Crispin returned, and his voice struck tin. "A draught." "From a closed room," Holmes agreed. "Curious, is it not? Mr. Vale, your late chief was about to speak of the stale breath of a trick. He had, I think, the truth in his hand, and proposed to print it. There are men to whom the truth is as gall upon the tongue." Vale's jaw worked once. "We do not print libels, Mr. Holmes, nor we murders," put in Lestrade, with a growl that came from his boots. "Which of you gents had the run of this corridor last night from 10 to 11? You, Mr. Crispin? Your cuffs look like a rainbow's end, with that violet Crispin turned toward the inspector with a stiff politeness that did him credit. I correct proofs, Inspector. That is my vice. If you will show me one of your constables without a smear of oil at his elbow, I shall show you a sub-editor with a clean cuff." Holmes stooped and lifted from the bench by the wall the little leather bag which we had procured from Pike and Ward, and which he had set there as unconcernedly as a man leaves his gloves. "And this," he said almost idly, "lay last night upon that very bench. Who placed it there?" No one answered. Mr. Hind coughed. Mr. Pierce said, "Really?" under his breath. Mr. Vale's eyes did not flicker, but Crispin's pupils narrowed. The glance he flung at the bag and away again was as quick and as revealing as a stab. Holmes set the bag down and, with that feline gentleness which in him was the mask of decision, took Jarvis by the shoulder and led him a pace forward. "Tell these gentlemen, lad, what you heard tonight." The boy, heart in his mouth and courage in his voice, repeated simply, "A hiss, sirs." "The same I heard last night when I knocked and thought I imagined it. From up there," he pointed. "Like this here whistle, Mr. Holmes has enough," said Holmes. "We do not try men in passages. We give them rope to hang themselves, or courage to untie the knot. Inspector, I will ask you to keep the Gazette as tight as a drum for the next few hours. No one in or out who is not named by Mr. Vale. Mr. Vale, you will. Oblige me by letting your second, Mr. Crispin, shall we say, write the formal notice for the morning, sudden death, inquest pending, no suspicion of foul play. It will tranquilize those whom it is well to tranquilize. Mr. Hind, you will keep your staff to their proofs. Mr. Pierce, you will do as you think proper on behalf of your clients who, I repeat, will not be troubled tonight." Crispin found his voice. "Why should I write what is not true?" "Because," Holmes returned, very quietly indeed, "it is sometimes necessary to play a tune to which a certain ear has long trained itself. If a man expects a locked door and an omen, we give him both. If, on the other hand, he fears to see in print tomorrow a description of a tube and a hinge and a voice, he may seek to forestall us. I prefer that he should seek." There was a little murmur at that, part indignation, part unease. Holmes took up the wicker cage and set it gently down again, as a man might settle a child to sleep. "You will all do me a last kindness," he added. "Go about your work as if nothing had occurred. At 1 o'clock precisely, Mr. Vale, you will send to me here those slips from the composing room which bear the headings and first paragraphs of the leading article. If any man should ask for them before that hour, any man, refuse him and send him away. Then, Inspector, you and I shall walk once round the yard together. We may find the night air wholesome." He turned on his heel without waiting for consent. As we stepped back into the dead man's room, he closed the door softly and stood a moment, listening to the decreasing hum of voices beyond and the steady respiration of the presses below. "You saw?" he asked me, in that still tone which he used when a single card had turned and he measured what tricks remained. "I saw, Mr. Crispin," I admitted, "but you warned me not to be greedy." "Quite so," he said, and his lip curved. "Crispin is the man whom Lestrade will arrest if I give him his head. He is too well cut to shape. That is seldom nature's way. Let us see who seeks the slips, Watson. The man who cannot bear to have a paragraph in type is the man who has lived an hour too long with his conscience." The next hour lengthened, as such hours do, into an elastic span in which every small sound made itself a portent. The presses drummed their steady tattoo. From time to time the boy Jarvis flitted down the passage upon some errand for the stone, and at intervals Lestrade's bulky shadow shifted, cat-like, to command a new angle. Holmes, who had the stillness of a poised spring when he chose, sat at Draycott's desk with his fingers steepled and his eyes half closed, but at the paling of the flame upon the bracket I knew that no minute went unmarked within. At 20 minutes to 1, a messenger from the composing room came to Mr. Vale with his cap in both hands. "Beg pardon, sir. Mr. Hind is wishful of the slips for the leader's head. Says as how they're to be altered before one Vale's pallor took on an ashen tinge. For all that, his voice was firm. Mr. Hind will receive them at 1 o'clock in Mr. Holmes's presence. That is the rule. Tell him so." The lad lingered. Mr. Hind says as our Mr. Crispin has no authority to write the notice. He says it's a matter for the night editor." "That," Vale returned with a flash that showed the steel under the parchment, "is my affair." Go Holmes did not open his eyes. "The fish is feeling the line," he murmured. At 10 minutes to the hour, there came a second envoy, a sober compositor with ink to his elbows. "Mr. Hind has sent for the form," he said bluntly. "He says if the leader is to be held, it must be now, or the make-up is spoiled." "Refuse him," said Holmes, and his eyes opened upon the man with a look which, for all its coolness, would have turned a hotter fellow than a compositor from impudence. "There is no leader tonight. You have the notice Mr. Crispin has set. Keep it there." The man saluted with his composing stick and withdrew. I could not but remark that Crispin, who had stood a little apart with his lips tight, looked at that, not relieved, but anxious. He made one abortive step as if to speak, and then thought better of it. When the little clock above the mantel in the dead man's room chimed the hour, Mr. Vale himself brought in a handful of damp slips, the headings in their bold type like little tongues of flame on the grey paper. Holmes took them, glanced once, and slid them into his pocket. "Now," said he softly to Lestrade, "the air will do me good." We descended a back stair into a yard that was no more than a square of stone hemmed in by soot-blackened walls. The fog here was a film, like breath upon glass. The glow from the lower windows laid oblongs of lemon upon the paving. The light well that served Draycott's room stood like a chimney breast to one side, iron grated at top, and with a narrow string of ledges, scarcely deep enough for a man's toe, descending its inner face. Somewhere far below, one heard a cistern drip, and the smell of cold brick and damp paper rose like an exhalation. Holmes drew me by the sleeve into the angle of a stack of old forms that leaned desolate and massive near the well. Lestrade, with a mutter, posted his men to right and left, and the watchman took station at the yard's door. For 3 minutes nothing occurred save that the presses slackened their run as the last bundles were flung to the carts in the court. Then, as softly as a fish's fin shows in a ripple, a shape came out of the darker angle by the back stair, slid along the wall with a practiced economy of motion, and paused at the grating of the light well. He had the small bag in his left hand. His right drew from his pocket what in that poor light looked like a length of string with a hook at the end. He knelt, listening. Then, with a little business of fingers that confessed an old habit, he fed the waxed cord down between grating and stone and paid it out with a touch that would not have fluttered a feather. Holmes's hand tightened upon my arm until the bone spoke. "A moment," he breathed. "Let him make sure." The man felt a catch, drew very delicately, and something faintly scraped below. He gathered in his cord with little tremors of satisfaction, the wrist making that quick turn one sees in a good fly fisher. A dark object bumped against the stone. His hand went up. At that instant, Holmes moved. He was upon the fellow like a stoat upon a rabbit. The bag clattered. The hook, jerked in surprise, rang against the iron. There was one short, strangled oath. The figure twisted with surprising power, slipped from Holmes's first grip, and darted for the stair. Lestrade plunged and missed by an inch, struck his shoulder cruelly against the wall, recovered, and thundered in pursuit. The watchman barred the door. The man flung himself at him with the blind fury of a cornered rat, feinted, swerved, and, seeing escape impossible, turned an instant as if for a second rush. By then Holmes had him by the collar, and one of the constables had his arm. He ceased with a collapse rather than a yield, and stood, his breath sawing between us. "Mr. Hind," said Holmes, as if naming the night's weather. "You have been fishing." In the half-light, the portly man's round cheeks had fallen in. The habit of his snuffing, mechanical even now, had deserted him. He looked at the grating with an expression in which hatred and fear were curiously mingled. "I came for the form," he muttered stupidly. "You keep a man from his work." "Your work is excellent," Holmes returned. "Inspector, let us see what swims in Mr. Hind's stream." He bent and with his long arm reached through the grating far enough to finger the ledge. The object, imperfectly drawn up before, lay there, a short length of rubber, cut at both ends, its mouth stopped with scorched cotton, beside it the metal collar of a gooseneck fitting, greasy with tallow, and, folded once and weighted by the collar, a small sheet torn from a reporter's notebook upon which some numerals and letters had been penned and blotted. 1.15, Omen, Press, V. Holmes held the paper so that the light from the window touched it. His voice, when it came, was as level as the paving beneath our feet. "You will observe, Inspector, how neat Mr. Hind is. A time, a cue, and an initial to remind him where to plant his attention. V is for ventilator, whether he wrote it so or no. It would serve for Vale as readily Hind's lips moved. "I did not kill him," he said, not looking at us. He sat and mocked. He said that next week he would print the trick so that old women would spit at the platform. I thought... He swallowed with a dry click. "I thought I would give him a warning. To make him a little ill. I have used the voice enough at the captain's rooms to know how far it will go. I meant no. Mercy generally comes earlier, Holmes returned. You purchased your apparatus. You fed it by the ventilator. You sat in the passage and hissed the dead back into the living. The canary died. You did not mean that either, perhaps. It is unfortunate that coal gas is a scrupulous leveler. Lestrade's hand was heavy upon the man's shoulder now. You'll finish it in a magistrate's room, he snapped. At the least there's manslaughter, and at the most, said Holmes, with a glance that checked even Lestrade's gallop. There is a mind behind Mr. Hind's clumsiness. Do you think a man who leaves himself a reminder of Omen and press invents a capital hand to write upon a blotting pad, or buys goosenecks and leaves them to be found? Hind is the instrument left upon the board to be taken. We will take him, but, Inspector, you will not close your hand too tightly yet. He stooped and, with a delicacy that was of a piece with his earlier touch, turned the little notebook scrap over. Upon the back the pencil had bitten more deeply, and I could make out, under his lens, the faintest impress of a previous jotting. Pike and W. Hob. The remainder was truncated by the tear. Holmes slipped the things into Lestrade's hand. You shall have your man, and the papers shall have their locked room, but I do not think Mr. Draycott's last lesson was meant for spiritualists alone. The forgotten omen, Watson, he added almost kindly, is sometimes the line a man will not cross until he does. There is a line yet for us to find. Come, we will return Mr. Vale his slips and ask him very gently, who in this house has been long accustomed to set another man to do his dirtiest work? We found Mr. Vale alone at his desk, his fingers worrying the edge of a blue memorandum as a man might turn a blade in its sheath rather than draw it. Holmes returned him the damp slips with a little inclination that was almost courtly, and then, with that air of disinterested inquiry which is his keenest probe, asked very quietly, who in this house has the habit of setting other men to the small errands which, in the end, prove not so small? Who calls the gas fitter, for example, or sends for oil when a hinge complains? Vale's eyes, which had the strained brightness of a man held too long upon parade, went first to the open door and then back to Holmes. Why, any of us, mister. Holmes, if the nuisance falls within our province. Mr. Hind has the night, Mr. Crispin the sub-editors and their room. I call a man myself when it is the safe or the telephones. Holmes's gaze lighted for an instant. Show me, if you please, the book in which such errand slips are entered. There will be one. Vale rose without protest and rang. The messenger clerk, a youth with ink on his cuff and a practical air, brought a dog-eared volume which, being opened, displayed a ruled page of scrawled requests and initials. 3 days since, said Holmes as if to himself, Pike and Ward sent Hobbs. Your man Ward told us so, Inspector. Whose hand called him? The boy ran a blunt finger down the column. Here, sir. Back office. Leak at bracket by editor's passage. Hinge to ventilator squeaks. Please silence. Send tonight if possible. A.C. Holmes took the book nearer the lamp. The capitals were small and neat, with that uniformity which comes of practice in correction. He glanced up at Vale. Arthur Crispin, said Vale reluctantly. He is exact in such matters. He will not have the proofs room full of drafts and squeaks when men are at their work. An amiable zeal, Holmes murmured. His finger touched the word silence. The faintest smile shivered at his lip. He even selects the verb. Vale's lean face hardened a trifle. Mr. Crispin is conscientious, Mr. Holmes. He's also loyal. He and Mr. Hind have run this paper by my chief's elbow for years. If Mr. Hind has, God help us, lost his measure tonight, it was under pressure and from folly. It is not Mr. Crispin's hand. You will forgive me, Holmes returned, with a courtesy that blunted the edge of contradiction. If I ask the facts to speak before the friendships. Mr. Crispin, he has a key to this door. To Draycott's. Vale hesitated. No, Mr. Draycott kept his own. But to the sub-editor's room, yes, of course. And to the back stair? The night editors and I have both. Mr. Crispin would have had one at times when he relieved Mr. Hind. They go by habit more than by rule. In the night, Holmes closed the book and pushed it back as if it had never been. And Mr. Hind's habit, he said, is to snuff when vexed and to leave reminders for himself in large capitals. Mr. Crispin's is to delegate and to print. There was a tap at the door and Mr. Crispin himself entered, a slip of paper in his hand. He had recovered that trim composure which had deserted him in the corridor. He bowed a fraction and laid the slip before Vale. "The notice," said he. "Perhaps you will amend a word." Holmes took it up with a civil apology and scanned a line. "Very proper," he observed. "Sudden death at his post. Inquest pending, the management regrets to announce." "Quite in order, Mr. Crispin. Your craft is in your bones." Crispin's mustache lifted by a hair's breadth. "I do my trade, Mr. Holmes." "And others?" Holmes inquired so softly that I, standing at his shoulder, might have missed the phrase had I not been watching his mouth. Crispin's eyes widened by the faintest fraction. The color did not leave his cheek, which argues a certain command. "I do not understand. You, it is no matter." Holmes returned with a look that had in it, to my mind, less of attack than of storage. "We shall all understand more in the morning." Crispin withdrew, and Vale let out the breath he had kept since the knock. "You go too far," he murmured. "I seldom go far enough," Holmes answered. "When the line is drawn, one must step over it to know it is there." He had barely finished the sentence when a constable's helmet showed at the doorway, and a raw-boned sergeant from the Strand station presented himself with the awkward salutes of a man who brings ill news. "Inspector Lestrade, sir." "There's word from Little Russell Street. Man named Hobbs, journeyman to Pike and Ward. Found gone in a yard behind the Horse and Compass. Looks like a fall, sir, or a set to. Mr. Ward sent to ask if it touched your affair. Lestrade's oath was the growl of a dog wakened from sleep. If it does not, it should," he snapped. "Come, Mr. Holmes. I'll have Hin to Bow Street, and if that Crispin—" Holmes lifted his hand, and the inspector's fury ran up against it like wave against a seawall. "You will have Mr. Hind safe," he said. "You will also have Mr. Crispin where he has been these 3 hours, under your own eye. Mr. Vale will oblige us by keeping him so. We will look at Mr. Hobbs. If a mind has been at work tonight, Sergeant, it will not have trusted to the good nature of fortune, and men who dislike talk do not leave living tongues at large." We took our coats again, and as we descended the stair past the dim oblongs of the composing room, where men moved like ghosts among their iron furniture, I could not help recalling the small impression on the back of Hayne's note, "Pike and W. Hobb." And the coincidence turned my stomach, as some coincidences will. Holmes, who had been as light and swift as a rapier all that night, slackened his stride for an instant on the steps and laid his fingers for a moment on my sleeve. "You see," he said, with that weary kindness which sometimes came to him between effort and effort, "why one keeps one's courage by distrusting the obvious. Come, my dear fellow. The fog is a compilation of confusing particulars. The truth, you will find, goes in a straight line, though it doubles once or twice to save its skin." The lamps of Little Russell Street made a dim procession through the mist, and beyond them the yard of the Horse and Compass opened like a black mouth. A knot of loafers had gathered. A constable held them back with patient breadth of shoulder, and on the stones by the dripping barrel, under a tarpaulin, lay a long shape that had been a man who drank when paid and worked when hungry. Holmes lifted the edge with a delicacy which had nothing of the coroner about it and everything of the physician. The face that showed was that of a coarse fellow of 40, with a purplish bruise above the temple and a smear of candle grease, oddly incongruous, upon the sleeve of his rough coat. Holmes's nostrils barely stirred. "Tallow," he said. "Old. And these marks on the wrist, cord drawn tight and then loosed. No robbery. His purse? Untouched, said the sergeant. He had coin from Mr. Ward at closing then, Holmes murmured, and his eyes in that bleak little square grew very bright. We are in the proper street. Our man tidies his tools when done, once in a ventilator, once in a yard. Inspector, we shall ask Mr. Ward to tell us who sent for Hobbs to the Gazette, and Mr. Vale to tell us who thought it prudent to let a clumsy journeyman go walking tonight with his mouth full of our business. Mr. Ward had been roused from his bed and received us in a frock coat flung over his shirt sleeves, his spectacles precariously roosted upon his nose. The shop, with its hanging loops and standing pipes, smelt of sleep displaced by oil. He grew grave when he heard of Hobbs. He left me at 9:40, gentlemen, with his week's money in his pocket, Ward said, rubbing his jaw with a work-blackened finger. He was cheerful enough. If he went out again, 'twas because he was sent. By whom? Asked Holmes. Ward glanced toward a little drawer by the till, hesitated, and opened it. A note came at 11:20, he admitted, by a nipper from the Horse and Compass. I keep such, well, here. From the drawer he brought a half-sheet, folded once across, on which were printed in small exact capitals, Hobbs, come at once to Horse and Compass. Yard, back gate, bring the cotton and tallow you used at the Gazette. Urgent, A.C. Holmes took it gently, and his eyelids narrowed as if to focus upon the very grain of the paper. You recognize the hand? He inquired. Ward shook his head. 'Tis printing, sir. Smart printing. We see all sorts. This is uncommon. Neat the paper? From a reporter's pad by the look. Raggy edge, sir. He touched the tear. We sell to half Fleet Street. You'll not hang a man on a decal, nor on neatness. Holmes returned, with a trace of dryness. You say a boy brought it? Aye. Slim, pale, with a collar too big for his neck. I know him by sight. Runs errands for the Compass. Sergeant, said Holmes, turning to the Strand man, you will find our pale Mercury, and ask him what gentleman bade him carry this. What height, what coat, and what voice. But do not arrest him for honesty. The sergeant nodded and vanished. And now, Holmes continued, you had a call 3 days since to the Gazette. Leak at bracket by editor's passage. Silence a hinge. Mr. Ward, who ordered that? Ward drew the ledger nearer and set his finger to the page as we had done earlier with Vale. A C, he read. The note came by one of their boys. Did it? Said Holmes softly. It is curious how letters repeat themselves. Back at the Gazette, the clocks were feeling towards 2, and a hush had fallen, such as comes only when men are exhausted of their own anxiety. Lestrade had dispatched Hind under guard, with instructions which I suspect he delivered as a man throws stones at a pond to break his own reflection. Vale received us standing as if nature had forgot to teach him rest. Crispin sat at the long table under the gas, pen in hand, revising a bill of contents. If his brows were set and his lips a trifle white, his industry did not flag. Holmes laid the printed note upon Vale's blotter. Mr. Ward received this at 11:20, said he. It summoned Hobbs to the yard where he was found. The capitals are neat. The paper such as lies in abundance in this house. The signature can be explained by 2 honest interpretations. A C for Arthur Crispin, or for Albion composing. I do not care which, so long as we agree upon the fact. Someone within desired Hobbs to bring the very materials used here and to meet in a place chosen for secrecy. Crispin looked up, and the composure of his tone did him credit. If you propose to show that I called Hobbs to a tavern yard at midnight, Mr. Holmes, I deny it. I did call him 3 nights ago to silence a hinge at Mr. Hind's request. He is clumsy. He leaves waste where a gentleman would not. That is the extent of my commerce. And your mustache? Lestrade put in sourly. Small and neat, eh? I have a man who saw just such a mustache with a tradesman's bag at Mr. Draycott's door. Crispin's nostril flickered. If you propose to arrest me for grooming, Inspector, pray do so. Mr. Vale, he added, turning in appeal that strove to be merely formal. This is beyond my patience. Holmes, who had been turning the note between finger and thumb with an absent air that deceived none who knew him, set it gently down and moved to the mantel. Will you indulge me, Mr. Quall? Crispin, with the loan of your pencil, he said, as if struck by a trifle. Mine is spent with the night. Crispin, after the merest hesitation, passed it. Holmes mended it with 2 small strokes of his knife and, by a gesture so slight that I do not know whether any eyes but mine would have read it, allowed the shavings to fall upon the open memorandum book by Vale's elbow. He wrote 2 words upon a scrap, tested the point upon his nail, and returned the pencil with thanks. Then, quite as softly, he blew the shavings from the book's page, took up the volume, and said, You keep notes of errands. Admirable. And you see, sometimes one keeps a note of the man as well as of the thing. I bent. Where the shavings had briefly lodged, they had left a trace of the graphite upon a stroke of writing a page below, and that writing, a C, was of the same weight and mechanical perfection as the capitals upon the summons to Hobbs. It was a small coincidence. It would have seemed to another less than the lift of a hand upon a bell, but I heard in Holmes's voice the tone he reserves for a door that is about to open. Mr. Crispin, he said, and with a gentleness so unfeigned that it struck me the more, we are a long way from proofs. There is one question only that I will put to you before I ask Inspector Lestrade to take upon himself a responsibility that I prefer to keep in my own hands. On whose suggestion did you send for Hobbs 3 nights since? Mr. Hines. Crispin met his eye and did not blink. On Mr. Vale's. It was as if a wire had hummed in the air. Vale did not start. He did not flinch. He took the truth as a man takes a wound he has been watching grow towards him. It is so, he said quietly, and you will hear me out. Mr. Draycott had the habit, unhappy yet not rare, of laying his civil courage over his physical caution. He meant to make an enemy of a sect very quick to take offense. I wished the door oiled and the hinge silenced, because I will not have my staff jeered at by women who can hear a squeak at 30 paces and cry, Ghost. I did not send for Hobbs to make a murder. Holmes inclined his head. Nor do I say you did. I note only that when a small thing is asked for, and a smaller granted, larger things sometimes ride behind it. Mr. Vale, where were you at 20 minutes past 11? In my room, he replied, without flourish. Mr. Hind sent to me. I refused him. I wrote a paragraph. I drank coffee that had grown cold. Ask whom you please. Mr. Crispin went twice in and out with draughts. Just so. Holmes looked from one to the other with an expression in which there was less triumph than fatigue. And now, Inspector, if you arrest on suspicion 1 man in this room, you may halt the true movement. I prefer to give our friend a chance to save a remnant of his vanity. At 9 in the morning, Mr. Vale, I shall request of you a meeting with your board in this room. Till then, no man leaves the building without your pass. Mr. Lestrade, you will set your men like bookends at the doors. Mr. Crispin, he turned and his voice altered by a hair's breadth. You will sleep if you can. As we stepped out, Vale touched Holmes's sleeve. If you mean... I mean, Holmes answered, very low, that your paper has in its service a mind too watchful of its own handwriting. Do not suppose that I think you knew the use to which your little errand would be put, but you have perhaps given loyalty to a taste for power which will spend it all. In the morning, he added, and the line deepened between his brows, I will speak to you of sealed packets and of a leader which does not end where it begins. Good night, Mr. Vale. You have my compassion. It is the only coin of mine I do not grudge. Morning brought a solemn assembly in the sub-editor's room. 2 directors with chill eyes and colder collars. Vale, austere and haggard. Lestrade with his notebook and his resolution. Mr. Pierce, who had stayed to see that justice did not splash his clients. And Arthur Crispin, faultlessly brushed and buttoned, who took his seat as one who declines to be moved by weather. Holmes, who looked as if he had not slept and did not require it, remained standing. He placed upon the table, one by one, a short, scorched length of rubber, a greasy collar from a gooseneck, the little notebook scrap from the light well, and the summons to Hobbs from the Horse and Compass. "Mr. Draycott died of coal gas introduced by this tube," said he, without preface. It was fed through his ventilator from the passage, the hinge having been silenced a few nights earlier on the order of A.C. The canary died, first, our forgotten Omen, because the apparatus was neat and the draught constant. The door was locked, the key within. The murderer never entered. He did not need to. He had contrived beforehand to make the door his accomplice. He touched the summons to Hobbs. When a man plays with such engines, he must afterward live with the debris. This asked Hobbs to bring the cotton and tallow used at the Gazette to a yard at 20 minutes past 11. It bears the same small regular capitals that called Pike and Ward 3 nights since to silence a hinge. It was carried by a boy who describes the sender's height and voice with accuracy enough to satisfy a magistrate. The journeyman came. There was a scuffle. The cord that had secured a tube secured a wrist. A blow ended talk. Hobbs knew whose errand he had served, and he died of it. He turned the little light well scrap toward the board. This, left to be found, is cunning that overplays. 1.15. Omen, press, V. It points, in the capitals affected, to Hind, and Hind, foolish and resentful, was the very man to be persuaded that a warning hiss might bring his chief to reason. He bought nothing. The buyer at Pike and Ward was another. "I bring you," he laid down a greyed slip of paper on which, by his familiar shading, ghost letters swam up. The impress from Mr. Ward's counter book of the top slip carried off at 8:45, 6/4 tube, collar, cotton, tallow, C. Olb, gas. Mr. Ward remembers the printer's smell, the watchman, a neat moustache, and a bag. I remember, Mr. Crispin, your mechanical capitals upon your errands, your note to Hobbs, and your very natural revolt when a soft hiss in a quiet corridor found your ear by its private name. Crispin had not moved while the chain was laid, link by link. His lips parted now. "You are a very clever man, Mr. Holmes," he said, and his voice, for the first time, showed the undernote we had heard only in the hiss. "I will add the last link for you." I meant to scare. He, Draycott, would have printed that filth and made us the town's jest. He had no right to squander men's work to sharpen his wit. Hind is a fool. I told him no more than to fetch and hold, and that I would draw the breath out again when the clock struck the quarter. The bird, curse the bird. His face twitched. It dropped too soon. And then the boy knocked, and Vale came, and there was no chance. I wrote the word upon the pad from the door with the tube. "You did not," said Holmes, and the steel came into his tone. "The ink tells me you printed it at 10 o'clock with a tired nib while Mr. Draycott spoke of proofs. It was to furnish the superstition you hoped for. The gas left no drama. You supplied it. After, you made a scapegoat in Hind and a corpse in Hobbs. That is not a scare. That is murder, calculated with the patience of a compositor and the coldness of a man who has long set type for other men to read and never counted the lines of his own heart." Crispin's eyes went to the door and back. Lestrade stepped once and was at his shoulder. The younger man's resistance was brief and contemptuous. He held out his wrists as if offering them to a tailor. "You will find nothing in my rooms," he said. "I am a tidy man." "We have what untidiness you left in other men's," Holmes replied. They took him, and later, by the slow machinery which English justice esteems, Arthur Crispin stood at the Old Bailey for the murder of Percival Draycott and of one Hobbs, and the jury, after short absence, found the facts as Holmes had stated them. Hind, who had sat in a cell gnawing his own folly, was indicted for manslaughter and, upon Holmes's intercession and the clear proof that he had not conceived the device, received a sentence which gave him time and the chance to amend. Madame Zuleika's rooms were crowded for a month and then fell back to their former careful trade. Captain Caversham bowed himself from police attention with such dignity as a compromised man may compass. In Baker Street, when the fog had lifted, Vale sat with us a little while. He could not forgive Holmes for saving the Gazette and stabbing his illusions in one movement. He thanked him with the grave economy of a man counting syllables against pride. When he had gone, I said as much. Holmes smiled and drew the bow slowly across his violin, making one long, level note. "My dear Watson," said he, "we are all printers, setting up in little lines the warnings we call omens and then forgetting to read them. A hinge that squeaks, a boy who hears a hiss, a bird that falls from a perch. One may pass them by, or one may pause. Mr. Draycott paused too late. Mr. Crispin never paused at all. There is no mystery in it. There is only attention." He played the note again, very softly. And that, as you perceive, is merely practice.